Hello friends, welcome back. Today we're continuing our series in the Pacific War by Kings and Generals. Today it's part 5 of the Pacific War series, week by week series that he's actually making, and he already made like a lot of episodes, and we're still around like episode 5. So today we're reacting to Fall of Wake Island. I searched it up in the Wikipedia and it says Battle of Wake Island was a battle of the Pacific campaign of World War II fought on Wake Island. The assault began simultaneously with the attack on Pearl Harbor naval and air bases in Hawaii on the morning of 8 December 1941, 7 December in Hawaii, and ended on 23 December with the surrender of American forces to the Empire of Japan. It was fought on and around the atoll formed by Wake Island and its islets of Peel and Wilkes Island by the air, land, and naval forces of the Japanese Empire, against those of the United States, with Marines playing a prominent role on both sides. The island was held by the Japanese for the duration of the Pacific War theater of World War II. The remaining Japanese garrison on the island surrendered to a detachment of United States Marines on 4th December 1945. It was the end of the war, right? End of the war. Yeah. After the earlier surrender it's the end of the war on 2 September 1945 on the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay to General Douglas MacArthur. And this was the fall of Wake Island. And the reason why I know about this because I actually seen the movie that was made in 1942. What you call that? What you call that again? Wake Island. Yeah. That's the movie. It's called Wake Island. I saw that and I kind of like it. So today, I'm very, very excited to watch the Fall of Wake Island. Like and subscribe, everybody. Thank you for all of you. Wow, the support is good. Wait, hold on. Okay, never mind. Oh my God, what happened there? I'm going to start my recording. I'm very, very sorry. I'm just gonna cut that out. Okay, still 0 though. And okay, here we go, guys. Starting my recording. I swear to God, the dog noises. God. Calm down. Calm down. Okay, let's calm down. Let's go. Oh yeah, by the way, this video is going to be in the first link in the description down below, and Kings and Generals channel is going to be second link, and the last video is going to be in the third link. Okay.
For the last 2 weeks, the war had raged on in the Pacific after the unexpected Japanese attack against British and American possessions in the east. The Japanese soldiers had
Don't forget about the French.
already achieved victory after victory, pushing their enemy back on Malaya, Hong Kong, the Philippines, and the Pacific Islands. But this week would be one of Japan's finest hours in the course of the war, as they finally overcame their enemy in Hong Kong, launched their main offensive on the Philippines, and struck an incredible victory against the only place in the Pacific that had managed to thwart their expansionist aims so far. You know which battles are always entertaining, the
Monster Legends. I heard about this game. Hold on, I'm going to skip that so that we can be quick in the video. Right here.
Gold, 10 gems, and the epic monster Kauri.
The Pacific War 1941 to 1941. Fall of Wake Island, December 21, 28,
Back
1941.
on December 11th, the task force of Admiral Kajioka had suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of the US Marines that defended Wake Island. Kajioka had underestimated Wake's defensive capabilities, and as a result, he was forced to limp back to base with 2 vessels lost and several damaged. But despite his complete failure, Kajioka wasn't relieved from his command. Instead, Admiral Inoue offered him more assistance for a second attack. Operations against Pearl Harbor, Guam, and the Gilbert Islands had concluded successfully in the first week, so their forces were now available for Kajioka to command. Inoue thus assigned him the 6th Cruiser Division of Admiral Goto for support, 2 destroyers from the Gilberts to replace those lost in the first attack, and
by the way, the reason why they're doing this so that they can cut off America to the Philippines and over here in Gilbert Islands, so that they're gonna have like a defensive perimeter.
2 aircraft carriers, 2 cruisers, and 2 destroyers that were returning from Pearl Harbor to give valuable ground support with their aircraft.
They're gonna bombard
now,
the
Kajioka
goddamn
had better
island.
odds to prove his worth in his second attempt to take Wake Island, departing Roy with his reinforced task force on December 21st.
Oh yeah, by the way, the first attempt was shown in the last part, episode 4. If you want to watch that part in my channel, it's in the description down below. Okay. And yeah, because the first attempt was was a failure, but the second attempt was a success. Was it? Yeah.
Meanwhile, in the Philippines, General MacArthur prepared his forces for the imminent main Japanese offensive.
They were
The most
prepared.
probable invasion site was in the Lingayen Gulf, where MacArthur had placed the North Luzon force under the command of General Wainwright, and due to the recent Japanese landings in the north, he shortened its operational area south of San Fernando on the coast. Thus, Wainwright sent the 11th Division and the 26th Cavalry Regiment to defend the Gulf north of Damotis, and also sent a regiment of the 71st Division to San Fernando to stop
Yes, now I'm remembering. In the 71st Regiment to San Fernando, one of my ancestors actually fought there, and yeah, he fought in the 71st Regiment of the Philippine Regiment. Okay, if you don't know Philippine history, my Philippine history, it's like family. Because the reason why I love reacting to the Pacific War, because I know some people that fought in the Pacific War. That is part of my family, of course, obviously.
the enemy coming from Vigan, while the rest of his forces stood on the route to Manila. On the other side, General Homma planned to land at the Lingayen Gulf with his well-trained 48th Division, then driving south between the Zambales Mountains along a valley that led directly to Manila. He also had prepared elements of the 16th Division, under the command of Lieutenant General Morioka Susumu, to land on Lamon Bay, planning to immediately advance upon landing towards Laguna de Bay. On December 17th, Morioka's forces departed Amami-Oshima, heading towards their destination. On the same day, Homma's first invasion force, consisting of the 9th Regiment, departed Keelung en route to the Lingayen Gulf. The following day, the 2nd Invasion Force embarked from the Penghu Islands, while the 3rd Invasion Force sailed from Takao, heading to its objective. The 3 invasion forces would arrive together at the Lingayen Gulf on the night of December 21st, and thus, Homma prepared to start his main offensive. Earlier that day, though, submarines from the Asiatic Fleet had discovered and engaged the Japanese convoys, only managing to destroy one of the troop transports.
Oh, hold on. I'm going to read that. Hold on. Very sorry. I gotta read that one. It actually be important. U.S. Navy submarine doctrine. The submarine commanders were conditioned by pre-war doctrine that held submarines to be a scouting vessel more vulnerable to air and anti-submarine attack than it actually was. Thus, they held back more than they should have. Oh, okay.
Only managing to destroy one of the troop transports. That same day, the Thais would sign with Japan a treaty of alliance, from which they received the northernmost Malay states that were lost in the previous century. They were also promised the Shan states in Burma, also lost to the British a century ago, so they would mainly support the Japanese in their offensives against these regions. At Hong Kong, General Sakai's men also managed to break through the Mount Nicholson defensive line, forcing the British to establish a last line of defense on Mount Cameron. And at Wake, the arrival of the carriers Soryu and Hiryu in the vicinity of the island meant that the defenders were going to be subjected to a heavy air bombardment. The attacks managed to destroy all the remaining Wildcats and also caused considerable damage to Peel Island. The following day, General Kawaguchi and 2 battalions of his detachment departed Miri en route to Kuching, where Colonel Lane was actually preparing to retreat southwest towards Dutch Borneo. To cover the convoys, the Japanese also bombarded the Singkawang airfield, forcing the Dutch to move their aircraft to Sumatra. Despite their
efforts. Oh yeah, I forgot. The Japanese now holds the Brunei. Brunei having some oil fields there. It's very crucial with their expansion because yeah, oil. It's oil, mate. It's oil. Anyway, let's go back.
Despite their efforts though, Kawaguchi's convoy would be discovered by Dutch submarines, who then started to prey upon their victims. At the same time this was occurring, British and American military leaders, as well as President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill, met at Washington in the Arcadia Conference. The conference would last until January 14th, and it would have important effects, which we will discuss down the line. But the most important one would be the reaffirmation of the Europe First strategy, already proposed in past conferences. This meant that the Allies would prioritize offensives in Europe.
Europe First strategy. The Europe First strategy was favored by the British and the US Army, and it prioritized the defeat of Germany of Japan. Yet elements of the US Navy led by Admiral King pushed for the allocation of more resources to the Pacific theater during the first years of the war, as the Japanese posed a more immediate threat than the Germans. Yeah, the Germans are too far away, and the Japanese, they're close. They're close to the motherland of the United States.
In the Pacific, they would adopt a defensive stance. But December 22nd would also see the start of Homma's main offensive, as his forces started to land in the Lingayen Gulf early in the morning. They disembarked largely unopposed at 3 positions, overrunning units of the 11th Division south of Agu. At the same time, Japanese forces at Vigan started their drive south, while the 9th Regiment at Bawang supported them with an attack to the north on San Fernando, and also advanced on Baguio to prevent a possible encirclement.
If you're wondering, my ancestor in the 71st Regiment was actually was actually the mother of the father of my great grandmother that is still alive right now. Yeah, he fought in this war, and my great grandmother was like around, like she was a teenager at this time period. So yeah.
Acting with haste, the Japanese would manage to reunite around San Fernando, leaving the regiment of the 71st in a difficult position and forcing them to retreat back to Baguio.
Thankfully, my great-grandmother's father, my great-great-grandfather, survived this war. And if you're wondering, Baguio is the coldest place in the Philippines. If you go there, it's so cold. Even though it doesn't snow, but it's so cold because it's like the city is above high mountains. So yeah.
About the landings, MacArthur would have asked for reinforcements to contain the situation, but with the US more focused in Europe, his Filipino forces would have to suffice.
Yeah.
Wainwright would thus order the 26th Cavalry Regiment to establish a defensive line at the town of Damortis, but they too would be hit hard by Homma's forces and ended up forced to retreat. Desperate, Wainwright then sent an M3 tank platoon to Rosario, which managed to advance up to Agu, but ended up destroyed under Japanese fire.
Yeah, the American forces in the Philippines were kind of getting desperate because of the American focus was on Europe, not in the Pacific. But when they were pushing the Germans back, their focus goes to the Japanese, because the Japanese now holds their old colony, the Philippines, and they're still at war with the Japanese because of the attack on Pearl Harbor. So yeah.
By night, Homma had secured Rosario and the immediate area of the Lingayen Gulf, with only the battered 26th Cavalry still resisting to the south. Thus, MacArthur's planned active defense operations to stop the Japanese on the beaches had completely failed. The next day would see the continuation of the Japanese offensive, which managed to expel the retreating American defenders from Sison and Pozorubia. Later that day, the 26th Cavalry would be surrounded at Binalonan, but would successfully retreat after 4 hours of heavy fighting. Beaten, MacArthur now knew that his best chance was to establish a series of defensive lines.
Yeah, they're getting too desperate.
The first one behind the Agno River, meant to delay the Japanese advance, while his forces at Manila moved to Bataan to prepare for a contracted defense. This plan was WPO-3, which had been devised by the American High Command prior to the start of the war, and was considered to be too defeatist by MacArthur. He implemented WPO-3 far too late, and did not properly prepare for its implementation.
Yeah, Douglas MacArthur isn't really a good general. He's alright, but he's not really the greatest. He's just alright. Look what is happening. There is like mistakes, and now, like I saw a video made by Kings and Generals, the operation in the Philippines should be blamed on Douglas MacArthur, and I'm very excited to react to that in the future, because that episode is like around like episode 24. Anyway,
the day already looked grim for the American defenders, but it was about to get even worse, as Kajioka's reinforced task force had finally arrived at Wake Island early in the morning. Under the cover of night, Kajioka planned to land his ground forces and SNLF Marines with naval and air support, hoping that the US Marines would not detect their approach, and staging a diversionary bombardment over Peel Island to distract them. Around 0300, the Japanese started to land at Wake Island, with some 580 Marines landing at 4 different locations, and a further 100 Marines landing on the southern shore of Wilkes Island. Heavy fighting ensued, especially around a 3-inch gun manned by Lieutenant Robert Hanna, which started to fire on the patrol boats used to transport the Japanese Marines. Hanna's gun was defended by Major Putnam and the crew of the VMF 211 Squadron, which successfully held the perimeter against the Japanese attacks. Although Hanna would manage to explode both of the Japanese patrol boats, the Japanese still landed all their forces and got to cut American communications. This left Major Devereaux and Commander Cunningham in the dark, so Devereaux would order forces from Peel to mount a last line of defense in front of his command post. A small force of SNLF Marines, the Keshitai, had actually infiltrated undetected on the eastern end of the airfield, advancing up to this last line of defense. And at Wilkes, Captain Platt and his forces had surrounded the 100 SNLF Marines, then executing a surprise attack that inflicted heavy casualties and left the Japanese completely weakened. But despite the Marines' best efforts, Cunningham would decide to surrender at 0700, trying to save as many lives as possible.
But knowing the mentality of the Japanese, burn all, kill all, burn all, loot all, Yeah. Surrendering to the Japanese is worse than just dying, because they're going to torture you. Yes, the most sadistic war crimes I've ever seen. It's just pretty brutal. Like the Bataan Death March. That's just brutal.
The American defenders would actually manage to hold most of their positions on Wake for 12 hours in total before the news of the surrender reached them. But at that point, Devereux and Cunningham believed most of these positions lost and could not check on them because they had lost communications at the start of the assault. The fall of Wake would nonetheless drop morale for the Allied defenders, but their
What happened to the prisoners of Wake initially? The Japanese Marines would then round up the survivors in preparation for their execution, I told you, leaving them stripped, bound, kneeling and facing machine guns, but the timely appearance of Admiral Kahioka could save their lives, as he wanted them as prisoners of war and not as martyrs. To be honest with you, people that fought in the Pacific War, like old people, have been telling us that surrendering to the Japanese is worse than just dying. Like, they're going to torture you in like the most sadistic war crimes I've ever seen. My God.
sacrifice would not be forgotten.
Oh yeah, by the way, oops. Oops, sorry. Okay, that's okay.
What? You haven't played World of Warships yet? Why the hell not? Playing
Okay, calm down, my friend. Jeez, okay. Getting
Allied defenders, but their sacrifice would not be forgotten. December 23rd would also see the fall.
I'm sorry. Hold on. I was just checking if the internet is connected. Yep, internet access is connected. There we go. I'm very sorry about that. Let's go back.
Of the Mount Cameron line in Hong Kong, leaving Victoria City to the mercy of the Japanese, as well as a Dutch attack by two submarines, the K-14 and K-16, over the Japanese convoys en route to
I
Kuching,
forgot about the Dutch.
which managed to sink 2 troop transports and 1 destroyer.
The Netherlands.
On Christmas Eve, Kawaguchi's attack on Kuching began early in the morning, landing at the mouth of the Santubong River. The British defenders offered fierce resistance, but in the end, Colonel Lane decided the following day to retreat through the jungles towards Dutch West Borneo. Also at Hong Kong, Canadian forces were preparing a last stand at the Stanley Peninsula, where the Japanese were rapidly encroaching on them. And at Changsha, the Japanese decided to start a new operation in China, which we will cover next week.
Oh.
The early hours of December 24th would also see the 16th Division landing at Lamon Bay to the surprise of the Philippine defenders. Morioka's forces disembarked at 3 different locations, quickly engaging the defenders of the South Luzon force.
Now the US defenders are now surrounded. That's bad, and we all know what happened. And for me, the Bataan Death March is a huge war crime. I know that's not the biggest war crime in World War II, but still, it's a huge thing. It's just sad, and thankfully, the father of my great grandmother survived this war. The reason why, he actually took my great grandmother, and they lived in forests. Literally, they lived in forests, and what you call that? And lived there for almost 4 years. And while they were living there, they were the father of my great grandmother, my great great grandfather, actually joined a group that was a rebellion against the Japanese occupiers. So yeah.
General Parker had placed the 1st and 51st Divisions there, but defences were highly disorganised, as the 51st was moving to Legazpi to counter the previous invasion. To add to the confusion, MacArthur had placed Parker under the command of the Bataan defences, then assigning the South Luzon Force to Brigadier General Albert Jones. Jones immediately planned to delay a possible Japanese advance through the mountains to Manila, while at the same time fighting an aggressive withdrawal into Bataan. Back in Mauban, Morioka was facing fierce resistance by the dug-in Filipino forces, but in the end, the Japanese still managed to push back the defenders. Forces coming from Legazpi also met at Sianin after moving through the Bicol Peninsula, while the main units of the 16th Division pressed west towards Mount Banahao and south towards Tayabas Bay, with the objective of taking control of the route to Manila. Homma planned for them to then advance across the Tayabas Mountains to Cavite, from where they would capture Manila. For the Japanese, the Filipino capital was now within their grasp. Acting according to WPO-3,
War Plan Orange Tree. WPO-3 dictated that the primary mission of the Philippines garrison was to hold the entrance to Manila Bay and deny its use to the Japanese. American troops were not to fight anywhere but in Central Luzon. An initial protective force would have the main task of preventing enemy landings, but if this proved unsuccessful, it was to engage in delaying actions while withdrawing to the Bataan Peninsula, however not at the expense of the primary mission. God damn.
MacArthur ordered Jones to efficiently coordinate with Wainwright for their retreat to Bataan, because if one of them retreated too fast, then the other would be trapped and annihilated. Thus, Jones established his main defensive line on the town of Los Baños, with the 51st Division hastily retreating south of Banahao under heavy Japanese pressure, and the 1st Division retreating north of the mountains with little opposition. At this point, Wainwright had also started to withdraw to his second line, ranging from the Zambales Mountains to the town of San Jose. On Christmas Day, the end came for the British defenders at Hong Kong, as General Maltby and the Hong Kong authorities finally decided to surrender. On Stanley, the Canadians resisted fiercely, and even managed to briefly break through.
Fall of Hong Kong. This day is known in Hong Kong as the Black Christmas. As many as 4,000 civilians lost their lives during the Japanese occupation. I told you, Japanese occupation in this time period was one of the worst time period. And thank goodness, some of my family survived in this war. And if you're wondering, there's like part of my father's side was killed by Japanese occupiers, and it was just brutal.
Through, but when news of the surrender reached them, they did so as well. December 25th would also see the invasion of Jollo in the Sulu Islands, with General Sakaguchi departing Davao back on December 23rd. Upon arriving to his destination, one of his battalions landed at Jollo and captured the city and the airfield, facing slight resistance from the local inhabitants. Now, Sakaguchi had his main base ready to conduct operations against Dutch Borneo. Meanwhile, on December 26th, MacArthur declared Manila an open city, knowing that its defense would probably cause the destruction of all his forces. Yet the city would nonetheless be subjected to Japanese bombardments that caused a fair amount of damage. At this point, Homma's forces had already broken through the towns of Carman and Tayug, but they failed to rout the fleeing American defenders. By December 27th, the Japanese had gotten to the towns of San Manuel and San Quintin, while Wainwright had successfully reached his second line of defense. This is where we leave you for now, but next week we'll cover the continuation of the Japanese advance down the Malay Peninsula and of the American retreat into Bataan. Once again, thanks to Monster Legends for sponsoring this video and supporting us. You can support us and play this fun game where you control armies of unique monsters. Consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps them.
Okay, the video ends there. My goodness, there's a lot there, and the next episode is actually what you call that, Battle of Kampar, and that is actually episode 6. Episode 7, I just ended my video. Episode 7 is actually Battle of Slim River. The next, battle for the Dutch East Indies, invasion of New Britain, fall of Malaya, battle of Makassar Strait, fall of Singapore, Japanese invasion of Sumatra, invasion of Timor, and fall of Java, fall of Rangoon, responding to Pearl Harbor, Hideki Tojo. Hideki, this one, I'm just, yeah, guys, this is gonna be the end. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate all of your support. Thank you very much. Like and subscribe. See you in the next video. Bye bye.